being reminded that your net worth is a few $100 is not, being reminded of that every day is not a positive experience.
That's Tim Hong, the Chief Product Officer at MoneyLion, a fintech platform with over 3 million users, most of them young and just getting started with their finances.
It's actually less about bad habits that we fight. It's about having no habits, right?
MoneyLion has a massive audience on TikTok and a big focus on content. Why?
There's nothing like seeing someone like you also succeed.
Tim joined nearly a decade ago when the company was still an early-stage startup. Today, MoneyLion is a publicly traded company, and it recently agreed to be acquired. Through all that time, Tim has been focused on one big question. How do you help people build better financial habits without making them feel worse in the process? In this episode, we talk about designing for emotion, inspiring action through content, and the psychology of control. Tim has an interesting take on self-driving money that we'll get into. We'll also get into how MoneyLion is experimenting with AI.
Content that's literally built one of one, that's for that particular user and only that user, truly your own financial advisor.
I'm Dan Blumberg, and this is Crafted, where we speak to the technologists crafting the future. Before we jumped into MoneyLion and fintech, I wanted to ask Tim about his work at a startup that measured people's brainwaves and how they react to different stimuli, like advertisements.
Look, some of the tropes that maybe you've seen in advertising are there for a reason. Cute animals, the classic, like, here's a pain point, and then here's the solution to the pain point. I think one thing that we did find, though, that was really surprising is just how quickly you had to engage someone. Otherwise, they would kind of tune out. Less than 5 seconds is what we found. Kind of really award-winning ads did it in 3 or 4 seconds, just immediately hooked someone. And, this is in 2008, 2000, like the aughts, late aughts. This is like, to put in perspective, like pre-TikTok, obviously. And we were already,
now we're down to
having
milliseconds.
having all these like attention spans that were getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And I think that's really informed some of how I look at the world today in terms of product. It's like you've got very little time, sometimes very complex things to communicate, and you've got 3 seconds to do it.
Yeah, that was exactly my next question is how does this understanding of what excites us, what bores us, impact the way that you approach product, the way that you build products? Can you expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with, financial services or fintech, there's a lot of complicated concepts, right? There's this kind of word soup of acronyms, APR, APY, all these things. And how do you communicate them simply, easily, quickly? And to really, truly make something mass market, we at MoneyLion view ourselves as an inclusive brand, an inclusive product, something that's really about empowering everyone to make their best financial decisions. To do that requires a approach that is approachable and accessible, and unfortunately done in 5 seconds or less. The use case we imagine is someone on the bus with their phone, not someone at their kitchen table with a laptop and a big Excel spreadsheet who's got, spending 2 hours once a month to dive into their finances. So I think that's informed a lot of, how we build product.
Yeah, I want to get to more of that. And I know MoneyLion brags about having the largest audience on TikTok of 3 million plus folks. So I'm curious how it informs all of it. Maybe we could just ground people first, though. You've been at MoneyLion for nearly 10 years, since before its Series A through its IPO. And as we're recording this now, MoneyLion has agreed to be acquired. The deal's not done yet. For those unfamiliar, can you briefly share what MoneyLion is, and both on the consumer and the enterprise side?
You could consider us in this kind of PFM world, personal financial management world, but where a lot of PFM apps are charts, graphs, net worth kind of considerations. We found that didn't resonate with our audience, that when you're kind of building your credit, building your wealth, being reminded that your net worth is a few $100 is not, being reminded of that every day is not a positive experience. And so we try to use content to drive action, to create inspiration, right? And then we have the first party and third party financial products. bank accounts, cash advances, credit building products, credit cards, and more that help people actually achieve those things. On the enterprise side, we take some of those same technologies that we use on the consumer side, these kind of embedded financial marketplaces, and then offer them to over 1,200 enterprise clients. So they embed our marketplaces in order to engage and monetize their own audiences with financial products. So we're firmly in this kind of embedded finance world that is really powered by APIs and things like that.
Yeah. Well, let's stick with content and storytelling as a driver of behavior change. I mean, you've mentioned how much MoneyLion cares about it, so much so that you acquired a media production company. What are some of the interesting ways that you're reaching folks and telling a story outside of the charts and graphs and maybe the depressing one that says like, you're not rich today,
Yeah.
that you found effective that might be interesting for other builders out there to learn from?
Yeah, we take like a very expansive definition of content, right? So content to us, can range from, of course, your typical almost UGC style video as an example, right? I mean, one of the trends that we saw is that increasingly people were going to places like TikTok to get their financial advice, right? Why are influencers influential is because at the end of the day, they're great communicators, right? And that communication is a lot more appealing, engaging, effective than, let's say a 5,000 word blog post that you might read online, right? So that's kind of one form of the content that we use. But we also find that, how do we get people engaging and interacting? We found, for lack of a better word, widgets are a great way
Mm-hmm.
to help people understand kind of the ramifications of some of their decisions. Like, if I saved $100 a month, what would happen after 2 years, right? At current interest rates on a high yield savings account. What if I changed that to $50? What if I changed it to 150? This ability kind of to touch and feel their finances is something that we really also focus on. The last is really around, content that's actually from the community, right? I think in a lot of ways, finances are very lonely at times. I think that's why you see people going out to the TikToks or the Reddits of the world to find community. It's because they want to talk about it. They want to get inspiration. There's nothing like seeing someone like you also succeed, whether it's, hey, I raised my credit score by 50 points by doing XYZ. It's not necessarily kind of indicative of what everyone can expect, but certainly it
Mm-hmm.
paints a path that says that it's possible. And so often when someone's either living paycheck to paycheck, trying to build their credit score, being faced with unexpected expenses that are really stressful, those things kind of as much about motivation and inspiration as it is about, here's this particular financial product that's gonna, solve all your problems. So I think
Yeah.
that's how we approach content.
MoneyLion's right now partnering with Mr. Beast and Beast Games, and there's a $4.2 million giveaway for people watching at home. I've watched a bit of it because I've got kids and they wanted me to watch with them. The oldest of them is 12. I found the lessons about money in the show like a little odd. It's all like, easy come, easy go. I'm wondering, like, in this environment and sort of with the instability of the US economy the past decade, like, how do you help people build good money habits? And I don't even know what those even are today,
Yeah.
because, the sort of YOLO, like, I might as well go high risk because other things aren't working for me approach. Like, I don't know who I am really to question that. Like, there's reasons people are doing that, but I'm curious how you grapple with quote unquote good habits versus other approaches, whatever you want to call them,
Yeah.
and how that's built into the products and the messaging at MoneyLion.
Yeah. I mean, we started with like, how do we uh, almost co-opt that feeling, but put it towards good, I guess is
Yeah.
one way to put it, right? I think one thing that we battle with, I would say the whole industry battles with, is actually around engagement in whether it's financial literacy or education or responsible matters, right? We fight against, saving money is not as cool or engaging as putting on crypto, or even now the prevalence of gambling. So the first step is how do we grab attention? How do we make it part of the everyday habit? How do we make it so that people don't ignore it? We fight against like apathy is kind of the first thing we fight against. And so it's actually less about bad habits that we fight. It's about having no habits, right? And so, I think that's like that's step one for us, is creating a positive relationship with money that isn't about ignoring it. I think there's a avoidance for sure around some of these questions. Like the enemy that we fight with is inertia, and how do we change that? So I've said the word inspirational like a million times now, but like a lot of it's about inspiration, right? And how do we like take these very complex lives? People, we saw all the time, people would be borrowing money, could be like putting it on a credit card or a personal loan, but then they buy other things like crypto, active, GameStop, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Those kind of things. You could say those would be irrational, right? By the kind of standard personal finance playbook that like a CFA would tell you. But I also think they reflect, well, I think you hinted at it, like reflect a deeper desire for, could be community, could be upside that maybe is lacking. And that is the positive relationship with money that they have with those kind of factors. How do we create that elsewhere? How do we create that with building your credit, with, taking the steps to buy your first home, investing and saving for the first time, those kind of things, right? And again, a more responsible manner. So, I think we take a very like pragmatic approach, I would say, to those kind of things.
Yeah. Tell me more about why you acquired Malka, the content production company, and how you're using AI to create different forms of content, and just how it's changing these processes.
Yeah, I mean, things are obviously rapidly changing in kind of the world of content with generative AI. So in 2021, we acquired Malka, as you mentioned, a content production studio. We had worked with them for 4 years at that point. I really loved working with them. Their hallmark is really being able to create content at the speed of culture, right? I think what I'm really excited about, normally we've talked about how I think people have used generative AI, in a way that is conversational, as an example, more scalable or quicker on the production side, right? Those kind of things. What we're really excited about is within our walls, how do we combine our data, our personalization about the user, whether it's their credit score, bank transaction data, which we have over 20, 30 million accounts linked within our platform. How do we help our consumer get a handle on that in an easier way? You can imagine creating content that's literally built one of one, right? That's for that particular user and only that user. So not even to speed the production process, but actually create a truly your own financial advisor. I think that's the direction we're really excited by.
Yeah, and I know you have a product, MoneyLion AI, that's in beta right now where you can, quote, talk to your money. I'd love to hear more about how that's coming to fruition. And please, it's okay to get into the weeds.
I mean, so number one, we really felt that there was so much innovation and that we hear about all the time on the kind of LLM level, right? The Perplexity, OpenAI level of work, but that there was this huge opportunity and huge amount of innovation still needed, not even on the LLM level, but on the application level, right? That we're really just starting to see the beginning of that and how that's going to evolve. And we certainly saw it with financial services, and particularly, how do we again kind of apply our data to and combine it with kind of the best of these models, and how do we do it particularly in financial services in a way that's again trustworthy, compliant, and then also privacy centric, right? Because no one wants their
Right.
credit score, transaction data. That was a hard hard no for us to
Yeah.
send that outside of our walls,
Yeah.
right?
But
And
you also want
so,
the experience to be kind of fun, I think, right? So
yeah,
it's balancing all that.
and it's a chance to, and I don't think we've actually, we considered so many different kinds of user interfaces. I mean, a good example is, and we continue to kind of experiment with that. I mean, we mentioned one, which is like, actually, you mentioned talk to. Right now, the norm is actually you type to, right? That's a very different, that's
Yeah.
typically it's a type to and a chat interface. And so we're really interested in potentially different formats like video, right? Um, we also looked at, is search the modality that people are more accustomed to, or chat, right? People want to have long conversations, or they want to get in and out? That's more like a Google search type of,
Yeah.
one-time response type of UX. We found that the one-time response was more compelling.
Yeah.
Uh, and then also even things like, how do we actually do the prompt engineering on our side and then be able to kind of embed the responses within the context of, how they're navigating through our app. So it's almost like AI, not as a destination, but that's something that's kind of through every single page or every single screen that you're navigating and guiding you as you go, right? So all those things are form factors that I don't think we fully understood
Yeah.
the realm of stuff we all had to tackle.
Can you give an example of something that you think these new, hyper personalized experiences, these generative experiences will enable that have previously been really hard or really clunky? That's the first question. And second, I'm interested in how you measure that these things that the system's performing as you hope it will when it's by definition not deterministic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So first one, I think the power and what we were really excited about is like, how do we bring kind of generative AI, our data set, but also our connectivity or our APIs with the broader world of finance? How do we bring them together? Because I think ultimately those are the things that need to come together to create those kind of delightful experiences. So it's one thing to, if you think about it from a first principle standpoint, it's like, okay, there's generic advice, and you could go to, ChatGPT today and ask advice for finances, and they'll give you, perfectly good but generic
Yeah, they'll give you
responses
whatever it's
there.
sucked in from Investopedia.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We power their marketplaces, by the way. So, like, that's an example of like, okay, that's one way to do this. How do we then layer on our data, which says, okay, you have a credit score that's 660, your credit utilization's a little high. How does that inform and change the response? And so that's really kind of been where we've focused on. And then ultimately, how do you connect it with the APIs that say, um, let's use one example, opening a high yield savings account, right? How do we connect you to, well, I want to know actually which financial institution has the highest APY, right? How do we feed that in real time? How do we then provide you kind of we call it checkout, the checkout flow that lets you action on it, right? And so, when you look at these things that should be incredibly straightforward right now, we still, as like an industry, are not delivering those for clients, right? We think about all the time, like, why have things like 401ks been so powerful for improving retirement savings of Americans everywhere? It's because number one, you're almost like forced to do it during
Yep.
open enrollment. It's automated. You don't have to do anything else. It's kind of built into the system, right? But what if I took even a simpler solution and said I wanted to save $100 from every paycheck into a high yield savings account? One part of the equation is, again, the inspiration and the advice that tells someone that that's the right action to do. And that's where generative AI and content can play a huge role. But then taking that action, right now, if you were to kind of walk through the steps, it's incredibly painful. It's like, okay, number one, I have to go to one place to shop for my rates. Like, what's the one that has the highest APY? Another place to then open that account. I then have to find this like, crazy set of digits that we call account and routing numbers
Hmm.
to then And then I have to take that, write it down on a Post-it note, and then take it to my HR system, like ADP or what have you, and set it up so that $100 of my money go into that account. And then if I want any sort of dynamism or adaptability of that dollar number, it's even more manual work. If I wanted to have it be changing every month, for instance. And that's just a simple thing like I want to save $100 out of my
Yeah.
paycheck, right? And so I think you combine these things together, and that's we're kind of plugging away, not just us, but also many others in this kind of API ecosystem to create those experiences.
On the question of how you measure the success of a product that has generative AI at its core, where it's not as linear as previous products, it's non-deterministic. How do you measure the success of the product?
Yeah, it's one of the challenges we faced, especially in our environment where, in financial services, you to some extent have to be more deterministic in certain cases. We're not talking, I mean, the precision of words matters, right? And so, I think we've been looking at and have implemented a lot of these kind of more agentic type of structures where there are certain types of queries or certain types of user input where we are actually routing to a different type of system. So I'll give you an example. We're finding that with brands or specific products that was very prone to hallucinations, right? That, if you typed in SoFi personal loans, you could not really be that specific or clear that it would actually output the right thing and wouldn't just kind of hallucinate. And so, we built infrastructure that takes those kind of terms and actually routes it through a different system where it is more deterministic, basically, where it is more, I don't want to say canned, but
Yeah.
but we have certainty around what it would be. And so we've used this kind of architecture to then expand into different types of questions, different types of use cases that we've seen. An example is sometimes people use our own users to ask a question that's more akin to like an FAQ kind of question or a customer service type of question. And so we've linked it into our FAQ docs
Yeah.
to be able to answer those. And it's a hybrid approach. These are all things that I think when we started, we didn't quite prepare ourselves for, but that's certainly what we've had to build.
Yeah. I mean, and generative AI is terrible at math, so I'm sure you're not, querying it to, what's the value of my investment account today? That goes someplace else,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
those kind of things, exactly, have to get handled differently.
I'd love to keep sort of looking ahead to the future and hear from you other things that are really difficult today that you think will be much easier in the future. And then if you could share, what you're working on, but also what other things maybe outside of your control need to happen for that future to be realized.
What's out of our control or to the extent that we need to build kind of coalitions or consortiums across the industry is enabling this kind of embedded finance or API driven ecosystem. Consumers time and time again have told that they want to be able to pick and choose their services across a broad set, that they maybe want to do their crypto Coinbase, but then they're borrowing somewhere else. Even if a particular financial institution had everything, they still want that ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the magic of some of these use cases or user experiences I just mentioned is about connecting them all together. And so, how do you not just only have read capabilities? How do I know the bank balances of my other bank accounts? But how do you have write capabilities? How do I move payments? How do I move money? Excuse me. How do I even
Right.
open accounts? Things like that, right? That takes the industry coming together, standards, and a lot of innovation. I think certainly if you look at places like open banking, for a long time, they were a little bit uncertain in terms of how they would be regulated or the
Yeah.
standards there. And so it's about, building that technology layer. And that will take time and consortiums to be able to come together with that consumer in mind and those use cases in mind.
And what are some of those use cases that can't really happen now or can't happen well right now that you think these sound like solvable problems? Although then again, if government has to be involved, who knows? But like, but what are some of the use cases that this would enable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see because I think we're starting to get there, right? Like, let's say, what's the number one use case of a personal loan so that you could pay down credit card debt, right? So maybe your credit cards are at 25% APR. You run that balance. It's really expensive. It's also kind of takes a long time to pay down that debt. And so personal loans are used to maybe you'll get a 15% APR. You could consolidate those credit card balances into one, and then things like, and then pay it down over a set duration. We're getting there. This is now, possible now, where you could pay down those credit cards directly. That the user doesn't have to get the money and then pay down those credit cards and do all these steps. Those funds could be dispersed directly to those credit card balances and pay those down directly. That's a win for the consumer because it's less work. It's a win for the personal loan provider because it actually reduces the risk and some of the default or the breakage there. And of course, credit card companies get their principal back, right? And so this is a win for everybody. And it's that kind of thing. Those are newer capabilities that people are still building into their flows that we think are really powerful. I mean, a lot of folks think about automated or self-driving finances.
Yep.
I think there's a question on whether or not users want that. I think there's a feeling, finances are always tricky because people do want to feel like they're in control, that they hold the button, so to speak. A lot of times we think about one-click finances. How do we get to the point where, you do everything but the last click, essentially, and the user gets the joy of feeling like they did something. I mean, in a meaningful way. And so I haven't seen the traction around self-driving finances. I think that's partially like I said, a psychology thing, but also a function of, again, those kind of APIs that don't allow us to do those things. So I think how we innovate and explore those is going to be the fun part, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, the phrase self-driving money has sort of caught on, but I'd love to understand a little bit more of whether it's gut or research that leads you to believe, and maybe this relates back to the brainwaves. I don't know, of like what excites you, that pushing that button when confetti falls.
Yeah.
How much will allow machines, to, here's my goal. I don't care how it happens. Like you machine, you make sure my goal happens, versus how in control people want to be, need to feel.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that line changes every year about what people are willing to release in terms of control. Right now, some of our most popular functionalities are ones that are like auto invest, right? So we, move $50 from your checking account. Of course, you opt in and you set this up. Let's say every week we send $50 from your checking account into your managed investing account, right? Now, if you just look at that, people they love that. They don't have to make any decisions. It's really good for people. Look back, we get user comments that say like 6 months later, they're like, I can't believe I have $500 in here. Like, how did this happen? Basically. And it's because they made, one-time opt-in, and that was obviously great for their future selves. The amount of automation there is considerable. If you think about it, the money movement, MoneyLion operates a robo-advisor. So we then take that cash, allocate it against the portfolio of the customer's choosing, low-cost ETFs, things like that. And so I think there's some drudgery that people don't want to do, but they also do want to feel like they have accomplished something. And so yeah, it's a balance, and I think it moves further towards automation every year, frankly.
Yeah. What else are you looking forward to in the future as these things evolve?
Gosh, I still think we're in really early days. I still think that it's amazing to me that, we have, like, if you just look at e-commerce, how, that world has obviously developed a set of solutions that are really powerful. And of course, that continues to evolve too. But where just a great example is like the whole checkout ecosystem, whether it's PayPal, Shopify, or otherwise, where your data doesn't need to be everywhere, right? That one solution is a monolithic approach, like Amazon, right? Where okay, you just shop at this one place. We're really interested and inspired by things like Shopify, where you're providing services to merchants, but also a streamlined checkout process where the user can have more confidence because they're not just like putting in their information everywhere. Financial services still operates like a DMV. You go to like a particular counter, they tell you to go over there. You have to like wait in that line.
Yeah. Did you bring your birth certificate?
Yeah, put in all this other stuff in there, and like none of the counters are talking to each other, even though they're in one building. And how do we put the user at the center of it? How do we make their PII and what they need to be able to transact in terms of financial services in their hands, in their vault, I guess you could say, and be able to permission it securely as they see fit without, and some of the side benefits besides the inherent privacy and security side is things like, I just don't have to type in my name and SSN everywhere.
Yeah, I interviewed the head of product at a health tech company, and he talked about how they're trying to prevent people from having to fill out clipboards over and over again.
I can't even
imagine problems all over the place. Yeah,
we're talking about that's another even order of magnitude of issues there, but certainly the same sort of problems, and it leads to the same sort of outcomes.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
That's Tim Hong. I'm Dan Blumberg, and this is Crafted. Please share Crafted with a friend. It's the best way for podcasts to grow. And sign up for the Crafted newsletter at crafted.fm.